August 23rd, 1944. And while the world burned in the grip of war and Europe echoed with the thunder of advancing armies and fallen cities, far from the front lines in a quiet Lancashire village, another story was unfolding. Freckleton, a place of quiet streets, village greens and the distant hum of American bombers stationed nearby. It should have been just another morning, but history had other plans. But this isn't a story of battlefields or soldiers. This is a story of lost innocence and how a village has never fully recovered from the loss of many lives. The morning started like any other. At Warton's Base Air Depot No. 2, known as Bad 2, American servicemen were busy refurbishing fighter planes and bombers for combat, Mustangs, Thunderbolts and the heavy B-24 Liberator. The people of Freckleton were about to go about their daily routines. School teachers were prepping for the day's lessons. The children themselves were probably packing their own school bags, ready to make the short trip from the homes nearby and to the school, which it used to be pretty much close to where we are now. Even the soldiers at the Warton Air Base, they were getting ready for, like I said, their daily routines. People, soldiers, locals, they were going to the Sad Sack Café, which was just opposite the former school. Everything seemed normal. The weather forecast for that day was also ordinary. Some early sunshine, light cloud, with rain showers later. But no one could have predicted what was to come next. At 8 AM, First Lieutenant John Allen Blomendell, a well-liked, experienced pilot from Minnesota, reported for duty. He was handsome, athletic, but also calm under pressure, and he was serving as both test pilot and officer of the day at Bad 2. Now that morning, 2 B-24 Liberator bombers were scheduled for a test flight, and it was Blomendell himself who volunteered to fly one that was simply named the Classe Chassis 2. The Classe Chassis 2 had recently returned from bombing missions over France and was undergoing final maintenance before rejoining combat. Lieutenant Blomendell chose to test fly the Classe Chassis 2 himself. Now assigned to fly the second B-24 that morning was First Lieutenant Peter Manaciro from San Mateo, California. From what we've read about this B-24 Liberator bomber, it was a tricky plane to fly. It had its faults, it had its quirks. But Lieutenant Blomendell himself had flown at least 100 hours in a similar plane. So he kind of knew how to handle this big plane, this big machine. Now the flight was originally set for 8:30 AM that morning, but Blomendell was delayed by other duties, so he had it rescheduled for 10:30 AM. And this would be a fatal decision. By 10:30, however, that morning, the weather had turned. The skies were black. A thunderstorm, and a heavy thunderstorm at that, was fast approaching this little village of Freckleton. However, both lieutenants decided to still go out and test flight those 2 Liberator bombers. The 2 B-24s took off together, climbing to around 1,500 feet. And over the radio, Lieutenant Blomendell called out a massive thunderhead forming to the south-southeast. Lieutenant Manaciro remembered it clearly, a very impressive sight, like a wall of darkness he would later go on to tell. Meanwhile, at nearby Burtonwood Air Depot, General Isaac Ott had noticed the severity of the storm, and he called Bad 2 with an urgent order: recall all airborne aircraft immediately. It was Lieutenant Colonel William Britton that would eventually order both men to return their aircraft back to Warton Air Base. At the Holy Trinity School, the classrooms were filled with the sounds of children aged between 4 and 6. They were all excited. It was their second day back in school after their holidays, their recent holidays. And like I said, they were full of joy, they were full of excitement, and they couldn't wait to get back into the school ways itself. They were back with their friends, some of whom they probably hadn't seen each other for the course of maybe a couple of weeks. I'm not quite sure if it was a summer holiday, 6-week holiday like what we have nowadays, but there was most certainly a holiday that they'd just returned from. So like I said, a lot of these children may not have seen some of their friends for quite a period of time. So they're excited to be back at school. And like I said, the school classrooms themselves were full of joy and excitement. Now, one of the teachers, Miss Jenny Hall, who was just 21, had started her new job only the day before. And her colleague, Miss Louisa Hume, 49, was due to retire within the week. It was at 10:41, so just minutes after the Clash of Sasses 2 had made it 1,500 feet in the air. Warton Tower had cleared the runway for both the Liberator bombers to land. As both B-24s descended through the storm, rain lashed the fuselage, visibility dropped to near zero, and winds tore across the landscape. Manaciro, flying off Blomendel's right-hand wing, decided to abort the landing and head north. Blomendel agreed, radioing back, Roger. Now, as Blomendel himself tried to pull the plane upwards and to get out of the storm's eye itself, the plane had become caught in a downdraft. And he shouted for full power, maximum power, but it was too late. The plane, from all accounts, the wings were near enough vertical. The bomber clipped trees, smashed into homes and obliterated the Sad Sack Café, killing 18 of the 20 people inside. Among them were cafe owners Alan and Rachel Whittle, their daughter, RAF airmen, American GIs and local civilians. The bomber itself came in from that direction, and it was one of those two trees in the foreground there. As it clipped, the plane itself was near vertical, the wings were near vertical. The plane crashed into the Sad Sack Café, which would have been somewhere around that location, before plummeting into the road itself, just around about here. Parts of the plane careered further on and into the Holy Trinity School, which were just on this side of the road. And this is where, obviously, all those school children were congregated at that time. Now, just over this wall is where that school, Holy Trinity School, used to be. No longer there now, replaced by houses. But it is just a short span of road where this disaster took place. Like I said, just over those rooftops there, across this road, spanning across, and then obviously hitting the school just about here. The tree itself, which we think the plane hit, is that one directly between the two houses, the two buildings just there. And like I said, the plane was near vertical, the wings were vertical as it came through. So a very short distance between there and, like I said, where the school once stood. The B-24's momentum carried across Lytham Road, and the nose turret tore straight through Holy Trinity's infant's wing, rupturing, igniting and engulfing pupils and teachers alike with highly flammable aviation fuel as the remainder of the aircraft, containing the 3 crewmen, crashed to the ground and somersaulted down Lytham Road. And within moments, the classroom was engulfed. Inside were 41 children and 2 teachers. Out of those 41 children, 34 died instantly in that collision inside that school wing. 9 children were taken out. They were dragged out of the inferno, out of the destruction. But sadly, 4 more children would lose their lives, totaling 38. Not only that, teachers also lost their lives in this horrific incident. The clock upon the wall of the infants' classroom of Holy Trinity School, this actually stopped at 10:47 a.m. To mark the 80th anniversary of Freckleton's air disaster, 1944-2024. And the plaque at the bottom says, "This is the site of the village school where on the 23rd of August 1944, during a severe storm, an American bomber crashed with the loss of 61 lives. This included 38 children, 2 teachers and 21 civilians and service personnel, always in our hearts." Now obviously with the thunderous crash, this sound that this B-24 Liberator bomber, the noise it made, it didn't take long before locals rushed out of the nearby homes and workplaces, and they were absolutely horrified by what they were seeing. But they instantly began to help, try to take the young kiddies and obviously those injured out of the devastation, out of the rubble. Policemen were soon on the scene, along with American servicemen. Like I said, mill workers, everybody came out to offer their services to pull the injured from the rubble. A lot of people suffered horrific burns. Volunteers suffered horrific burns. They lost fingers, they lost limbs. A lot of them had all the hair on the head singed away. It was absolutely horrific. It was hell on earth. The children that died that morning, they were taken to a makeshift morgue at the nearby Coach and Horses pub, which is now directly in front of us, and again only yards from where the school used to be. They were brought here to a makeshift morgue to await identification. Now any survivors that were pulled from the wreckage, they were taken to the nearby American military hospital, and this was at the Warton Air Base. Several more people would sadly lose their lives, as we touched upon, at the hospital itself, due to the horrific injuries that they sustained. But it was the volunteers themselves who were quick to rummage through the wreckage. We have to remember that this aviation fuel was burning at such a temperature that everything they touched, from the wreckage to the stones to the wooden beams, everything they touched was absolutely burning hot. They were suffering from severe and horrific injuries themselves, to the hands, to the face, to the feet. But these were real heroes. These were people who didn't care about their own well-being. The military service people, the police, like I said, local volunteers, residents, mill workers, they were quick to put their bodies in harm's way to try to free people from this rubble, from this wreckage. Now, in the chaotic moments that followed, children aged 7 and older fled in panic. Some, like 7-year-old Patricia Grafton, escaped through a rear door, and she later recalled dodging a falling, burning beam and bricks from the chimney. Others ran towards the playground, only to become trapped near the flames when they found the school gate locked and the wall too high to climb. On August the 26th, the village gathered to bury its dead, and American servicemen built the children's coffins. They dug the T-shaped communal grave in Holy Trinity churchyard and served as pallbearers. More than 500 floral tributes surrounded the site. The line of tiny caskets was carried through the village by men who, days before, had eaten at the sad sack or repaired planes at Bad No. 2. They also wept alongside the families of Freckleton. The memorial to remember these victims, as you can see, it is in the shape of a plane. You've got the two wings, you've got the tail, which obviously is going upwards. But on the wings, interestingly, you've got all the names of the victims. You've got the children, and then you've got the civilians. And then in the centre, you have obviously an inscription, which simply says, "Sacred to the memory of the 2 teachers, 38 infant scholars and 7 civilians who lost their lives when an American Liberator bomber crashed during a thunderstorm and destroyed a part of the adjoining school and other property on the 23rd of August 1944. This monument was erected over their grave by public subscription. In God we trust." Now, close to where the school itself used to be, just a couple of minutes walk, there is this big stone, and it is a memorial to all those children that died in that horrific disaster. And it simply says, "In memory of the children who died 23rd of August 1944. In fields remote from these, their lost bright laughter will ring forever innocent and sweet. And unknown flowers where they run hereafter will bloom like fadeless stars beneath their feet. Charles E. Butler." It was whilst paying our respects to obviously all the victims of the Freckleton air disaster, an elderly lady came past and she stopped and talked to us for at least, a good 30 minutes, would you say? And she was one of the lucky ones.
She said that herself.
And she said that herself. She was ill on the day of the incident itself, and her mother didn't send her to school that morning. But 4 of her close friends, I think she said 4, didn't she? Certainly were at that school that morning, and they sadly lost their lives, and they are in that communal grave. Now, she came past to start with, and she kissed her hand and put it on the headstone. And you could see she was visibly upset. And obviously we got talking to her about it, about the whole story. And she told us quite a lot of interesting things about what occurred that morning. Obviously what occurred after, didn't she?
What you've researched about the sky.
And the sky,
So
she
she's
kept
always
mentioning.
remembering that
Yeah.
sky.
Yeah, she kept mentioning the sky and just how black it was. And she said before that and after that day, she's never seen it like that ever. But she is petrified of thunder, didn't she?
Yeah.
She said she's absolutely petrified now of thunder. Now, she said the sky though, she said it was as black as the jacket I am wearing. And now all the stories we've read covering this story all say exactly the same. They've never known a thunderstorm like it before or ever since. So you do ask the question, don't you? I mean, I know it isn't an act of God. Some people who believe in God and that, they may say it is an act of God, but to take so many lives, 60 odd lives in total, it's horrific. But this lady, she was called June. I won't give her surname, but she was called June. And
she was absolutely lovely.
She was really nice.
You can tell she's lived with this all her life.
Yeah.
And I think she's probably come to this memorial nearly every day by the look of it.
I think so.
Yeah.
I got the impression she comes here every single day. But it's the way she kissed her hand and put it on the actual, one of the wings of the memorial itself.
She was so emotional about talking about, what was it, the wheel she constantly saw. She kept on talking about it to her husband, and so her husband read about it.
Yeah, now the wheel, which Vicky's referring to, is we do have a photograph, and I'll put that over, but we do have a photograph of obviously the scene itself, the scene of destruction. And there is one photograph where it does show the wheel from the plane itself that crashed. Now, this lady June said she vividly, or not vividly, she certainly remembers seeing, as a child herself, this wheel embedded in the school, somewhere in the school itself. But her husband, she said, used to fall out with her, calling her a lie. It never happened. And she said it was only on one of the anniversaries of the actual air crash itself that a photograph came out showing this wheel. So her husband had to apologise and said, fair enough, you were right. Now this photograph, like I said, we do have, so we will have overlaid it by now. But she was, Yeah, she was really, really nice, wasn't she?
I think it's the fact that obviously everybody involved is going to be heartbroken, but actually being here today, speaking to somebody who remembers that day and who was lucky enough not to be a part. Well, I suppose she was a part of the day.
She said she was lucky. She's always felt lucky.
But she was still part of that day because of what she saw and what she encountered.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's hearing it from somebody who's actually experienced.
Yeah. I mean, obviously she's not a child now, but she was a child, and she should have been in school that morning with her friends, her 4 friends who sadly died. Yeah. And she even touched upon it, didn't she? When I said was it an act of God? She actually touched upon it herself, and she said, by the grace of God, then 4 friends of hers are in this plot here. She said it herself, the grace of God, and she was lucky to not be in school that morning.
Oh, and she mentioned Bing Crosby.
Yeah, Bing Crosby also came to the area, and apparently he went to the hospital itself where they were taken to. But did she say he broke down, didn't he?
When he saw Maureen.
When he saw Maureen, one of the victims, he broke down and cried, and he couldn't continue with obviously doing whatever he was doing to try to cheer people up. Such was the actual scenes and the emotion that was running through the place at the time. But this is Bing Crosby. Obviously, many people see him on TV, don't they? And he's singing and he's dancing, you know. But for somebody like him to visit this place, but to break down, well, you could see she was visibly upset.
She could break down talking about it any time.
Yeah. I mean,
she's still with her to this day.
She told us all the things which we're not going to repeat on camera. We don't think it warrants it. And I was going to ask her if she wanted to be on camera.
I don't think she would have.
I'm not saying. I kind of got the impression if I'd have asked her, she probably would have politely refused. Yeah. Because you could see she was getting emotional just being at the side of the memorial headstone itself.
But for us, I think it was nice to actually
to speak to her, to speak to somebody who is she's a lucky survivor, because look, that the fact she didn't go to school, but she's also survived it for how many years since this happened.
I think, like you say, you do all the research, and you get into the story any way, but then speaking to her gets you more emotionally connected to the story. There
was a lot more I wanted to ask her, and I could have asked her, but I didn't want to in the end, because I could see, like say, you could see her eyes, how bloodshot, the red. She could see even now she was upset, so I didn't really want to go too far with it. But yeah, that was nice, wasn't it, to speak to somebody who, like I said, who's kind of survived it, like you said. Her own words were she was lucky, the fact that she was ill that day, so her mother didn't send her to school. But she said she only lived just at the side of us here. She actually lived in some houses that were just here.
That's when they went out that morning.
And they went out that morning after the bang. And she even said her mother thought the Germans had come back. And this time obviously dropped a bomb on the place. Such was the deafening loudness of what happened, and the black sky. And her mother screamed at her to get out of bed and get downstairs and get out the house, because they thought the Germans were back. But yeah, it was just near the old Coach and Horses pub where she lived that morning.
She was a lovely lady.
She was a really nice lady to speak to, she really was. Now, a lot of people will be asking, why did the pilots fly into the thunderstorm in the first place? And a report that was undertaken by Major Charles Himes shortly after this horrific incident, he also cited that it was human error, and the pilots themselves, as said, were to blame, citing why would they risk flying into a thunderstorm in the first place. But the report never addressed why no direct warning was issued to the pilots, or why they were not advised to divert further north and beyond the storm system. It seems it was easier to blame the man who could no longer answer, and that was Lieutenant Blomendal. Now, on the day of the funeral itself, it appears, and June, she backed this up, she would say that along with making some of the coffins, the American soldiers made some of the coffins, they also became the cortege, and they helped carry those coffins along Lytham Road into the churchyard and to the final resting place, which is at the far end of the churchyard itself. And again, these soldiers, these American soldiers, they were in tears, floods of tears. Not only had they lost one of their own in Lieutenant Blomendal, and as well as obviously the 2 other crew members on the plane that day, they'd lost friends here in Freckleton, and they had lost a lot of children. Again, it was an accident. Nobody had foreseen what was about to happen, but it still didn't stop them American soldiers feeling the pain, all the pain just as much as what the local residents were feeling at that time. And like I said, they carried those coffins here into the churchyard to their final resting places. Now, on a side note to this story, there is one sergeant, police sergeant by the name of Thomas Braithwaite, and he was one of the first people to attend the scene of the accident at the time. And he was one of the first people to get into the school to try to bring some of those children out. He put his life at risk. Now, for those who have watched our videos, or hopefully you've watched our videos, that name should sound familiar. Because Police Constable Thomas Braithwaite, as he was known then, he was a police constable that managed to locate 5 children trapped in an old mining system in Haslingden at Sykeside, known as the Pike Law Caves. These 5 children went in to investigate but got lost. Now, one child who didn't go in with them at that time, he told the families, the parents of the missing children, that he had last seen them entering this cave. Now, such parties were undertaken. Miners themselves went into the caves looking for the children but couldn't find them. However, Thomas Braithwaite himself had a gut feeling those children were in that mining system, and he put himself at risk by trying to locate them, in which he did. Now, for more on that story, I'll put a link in the comment box down below in the description of this video as well for you guys to go and check it out. It's a fascinating story, and luckily those children were found before they came to any serious harm. Thomas Braithwaite got a commendation. He won one of the top awards for his bravery for helping find those children. So Thomas Braithwaite himself, not only did he receive many awards throughout his career in the police force, he was also involved in 2 pretty high profile cases as well. The Pike Law Caves situation, and obviously here in Freckleton. Now, here's a story, here's a guy which we are looking into, and we may cover his life at a later video because it is a fascinating career that Thomas Braithwaite had. The lady, June, who we were talking to further back at the graveyard, she also mentioned this memorial stone here and how it had been originally placed in a playground. Now, the plaque itself, as I've read out, does say it was presented, this playground was presented to the children by the American neighbours. Now, apparently it was removed from the playground because children were climbing on top of it. And as you can see, it is quite a height, and especially for young kiddies. So I can understand why it was removed. I don't think she was happy it had been removed from the way she spoke about it, but I can understand why it was removed personally. And where they have placed it, if I turn you guys around, it is in a nice little secluded part of this area and set further back from the church itself. You've got the bushes, you've got the ferns, trees either side, but you have it here right in the middle of the pathway. And it is nice to see that it is now being maintained, it's being looked after from what I can see. So yeah, a nice little remembrance of loss for those children back in 1944. Now today, the story of the Freckleton air disaster is rarely told by people outside of Freckleton itself. There are a couple of videos on YouTube which you can easily find, but otherwise it is a story that has been consigned really to the textbooks. It's a story that we've wanted to cover for quite a while, myself and Vicky, and to do it today on a somewhat windy day is a bit ominous in a strange kind of way. We know on the day when this event unfolded, the weather turned horrific. By 10:30, the skies were as black as ever been seen, as black as my jacket is from all accounts and what June was telling us. Today it's very sunny but extremely windy. But it is a story that we've wanted to cover for quite some time, and to be here to finally pay our respects and retell it as best as we could. Now, we didn't want to go too deep into, obviously, the severity of the injuries sustained to the children out of respect, because what we have read isn't nice to hear. It does involve children at the end of the day. The information is out there, like I said, in text form. Many books have been written about it. So if anybody is interested in this horrific event, please try to do some research yourselves. And like I said, there's a lot more out there which we have kind of skipped across. We just wanted to come here to Freckleton, bring you guys with us, show us the areas where obviously this plane struck the tree and where it crashed and careered into the former school. We also wanted to pay our respects by visiting the memorial and where all those victims are now interred at the Holy Trinity Churchyard. If you have heard of this story, as always, don't forget to comment down below and tell us your thoughts on it. Maybe you're a local, maybe you're a survivor from 1944, such as what that nice lady June is. Again, don't be afraid to comment down below and tell us your thoughts. But in the meantime, we're going to leave it here at the Holy Trinity Churchyard. And I know it's a morbid one, I know it's a sad one, but we do hope you've enjoyed this story nevertheless, and the video itself. But in the meantime, guys, I want you to take care, look after yourselves, and we will be back with more tales from a dark, but at times glorious past. Stay safe, stay curious.